Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. Welcome to your Friday edition. It's a later than normal recording because, quite frankly, we wanted to gather more information before we hit record. And guys, I don't know if the information that we gathered made it any more clear of where the program is at from a recruiting standpoint, from a bowl prep standpoint, from who's coming back standpoint next season. Uh, Oregon had their first media availability with players and head coach Dan Lanning since basically the Oregon State game. Dan Lanning had that one press conference on a Zoom call Monday night, or was it Sunday night? Sunday night, um, ahead of the opening of the portal window. They hadn't hired an OC yet. They hired one the next day, but a lot has changed since that last meeting. And quite frankly, just to give the listener an idea, like we had an idea of what we wanted to talk about. And then as we kind of talked out our show before the show prep, it kind of morphed again just because there's a lot to get to and the information continues to change. So this podcast, I don't want to say it's going to be all over the place, but it's going to be all over the place. We're going to start with Bo Nix. And he spoke with the media. He was the last one to speak with the media. And I kind of got the sense, I don't know, Erik was there with me. Jared is in Massachusetts, back home for the holidays. But Erik, I kind of got the sense that like he kind of didn't really want to be there. Like he gave good answers. He gave very smart answers. And he quite frankly isn't ready to announce what he's doing, whether that's coming back in 2023 or going pro in the 2023 NFL draft. It was an interesting press conference. Not that he was like bad or anything like that, but you could just tell like he even ended the press conference by himself, just shutting it down. All right, guys, thanks. See you later. And he just walked away.
Yeah, well, and what was sort of interesting was he almost sounded like a passive figure in this decision making. I don't know if you guys picked up on the wording. I'll read one of the quotes, which was, "I hope it's as soon as possible. Like you guys, I'm ready to know my decision." And you're kind of going like, "Buddy, it's your decision. You're the decision maker." And again, I'm kind of making light of the situation because I know this is a really difficult situation. As he said, there's a lot of moving parts here with NFL kind of recommendations, with what can Oregon offer from an NIL perspective. What does he make of Will Stein, the new offensive coordinator? How does the bowl game go? Maybe how does that impact the NFL draft perspective on him? So I don't want to minimize that, but it was kind of funny when he gets up there and kind of goes, "Yeah, I don't know my decision. I hope to know it soon." And you're kind of going like, "Yeah, but you're the one making that decision." So we do know he's playing in the bowl game. He reiterated that. He said that was an easy decision, and obviously that would be a decision that would pale in comparison to this one. Um, but he will be playing in the bowl game down in San Diego against North Carolina. It's funny, we had this is a bowl prep interview scrum today with several players, with Dan Lanning, and we really didn't talk about North Carolina much at all. I feel like we still don't have a ton of
Nor should
information.
we.
I mean, I know, and I'm not arguing that we should have been like, "Hey, who cares about what you're doing afterwards? Let's talk about this kind of meaningless holiday bowl in like 10 days. What's going on there?" And I hate to say meaningless, but like genuinely, like I was kind of chatting with some of the other reporters there. There's no buzz around this game, but like both teams have key players not playing, and it's just kind of like it almost feels like an extension of the offseason more than it does a part of this season. But back to Bo, I think we don't know. I don't expect we'll know before the game. He was asked a lot of different questions about why this is such a tough decision, and again, he's got a lot of factors going on here, and he did say it's going to come down to some prayer, some time with his family. His wife's going to have an input on this decision, but it's not one we know right now. And I think if you're Oregon, that puts you in kind of a precarious situation. And I don't know what the conversations behind the scenes with Dan Lanning have been like, if Dan has a more clear idea. But if you're going out here now, and I don't want to jump past the Bo stuff because neither Jared or Matt have really had a chance to talk about it, but you do just wonder how that's impacting the Dante Moore recruitment, how that's impacting some of the transfer portal targets. There's just a lot going on at that particular position, and what Bo decides ultimately to do could really impact what Oregon ends up doing from a recruiting perspective in the both the immediate but also then the long term of a guy like a Dante Moore, who it sounds like part of this decision will be, I'd like to be starting right away. Bo, if he comes back, will get in the way of doing that at Oregon. UCLA, where he's rumored to be leaning now, has an open spot. Plus, it sounds like some NIL offerings that are kind of competitive and intriguing to him. So there's just a lot of moving parts. And the fact that Bo hasn't made a decision, again, I'm not blaming him because it's a huge decision, is certainly impacting what Oregon can tell prospective quarterbacks out there on the trail right now.
It's certainly, like you mentioned, he was really passive about this decision, which was really strange. It kind of felt like he was being, not, this is so over exaggerating, but almost like in a hostage in this situation where it kind of felt like I'm kind of waiting for whatever I'm told that I can do. Like, hey, Bo, we'd love to have you back. Or, hey, we have Dante Moore locked up. Like, he's coming. Like, you're free to go to the NFL if you'd like to do that. I mean, he was asked in a myriad of ways of what this decision would look like, what the timeline would look like, what are the things that go into making this decision process. And they were all very diplomatic responses. They were all cut and dried, no leaking, can't really take too much from one of his answers. I think James Krupke, the Oregonian, asked him about does NIL make an impact on this? And he's like, yeah, it probably does, but he doesn't think he can make a bad decision, which is how he ended most of his segments with, was either way, I'm making a good decision, which I agree. I think we should really be talking about Bo in this situation, but it does feel like there's the underlying recruiting dilemmas that Oregon is dealing with might be steering the ship from behind the scenes on what Bo Nix does or does not do. I agree with him. I think either way, it's a good decision, whether he comes back or whether he goes to the NFL. I'm not sure. I've kind of sat here and thought about it for the last couple of days. I'm not sure what else he has to prove at the collegiate level, especially after the season he just had to come back. I know all the Oregon fans would like him to come back because he was really damn good this past season. And other than that ankle injury towards the end of it, Oregon was really, really, really successful with their offense. And I kind of do wonder how much the decision that Kenny Dillingham made for himself to leave and take the head coaching job at Arizona State, how much that'll factor into it, because he did mention how it's really productive when you can go from an offense 1 year and then come back into that same system. He thinks it's productive. So I wonder if I don't want to take anything from that, but some type of hidden message that it's like, oh, well, I have to come back and learn an entirely new offense after having an offense that I knew beforehand at Auburn as a freshman. So I don't know. There's a lot of things that could be taken away from this, but ultimately the biggest thing is that there is no decision. There's not a clear, concrete decision from Nix whether he's coming back for next season or if he's entering the draft, which, I think we all kind of thought maybe there would be one coming into today or at some point this week he would make an announcement, but still nothing yet. It wasn't happening today. I don't know if it will happen anytime soon.
Well, not to butt in for Matt, but what you said after we walked back, as we're walking back to the car, kind of resonates with me. Is he's talking so passively. Matt, you kind of brought up the point of do you think they're in NIL negotiations, and the reason he doesn't how much of this is he's just kind of waiting to see if they get to the number he wants them to get to. And it's crazy. Again, for the 100th time, I will say it's crazy we're talking about this with college sports because this has never been the way it was publicly. But Matt, I kind of think you might be onto something with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it felt like of when he said, hey, it's, I want this decision to be over too. And when you were like, well, you kind of control that, to a degree. And like you said, this is new to college athletics where maybe he wants to stay, but he only wants to stay if he can get some financial guarantees from NIL opportunities around, the University of Oregon, which Oregon doesn't have any kind of say in that. And Oregon just kind of sitting here going, boy, it'd be sure nice if we could get a concrete answer from somebody like, Bo, are you coming back? Dante, hey, like we're still here too. Transfer, like, do we want to go that direction? But for Bo, like, he's in a tough spot. And this is one that's a new decision that not only Bo, but a lot of players across college football are having to make now, where it's, hey, I could go to the NFL. He said today that he received a day 3 draft grade when he was leaving Auburn and to come back to school. And so if you just say he maybe marginally improved that, which I think is very conservative, he's probably still a day 3 guy if it's a marginal improvement there. And that's where NIL can become a difference. Like, you can maybe make $1 million, $2 million if you're a star, high profile quarterback at the college level at a school that's at the level of Oregon in one season, which would be more than what you would make in 1 year at the NFL level from a 6th round or a 5th round draft pick. Now,
practice squad or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Now, Jeff Schwartz on Twitter, he was responding to a question of take it 1 year NIL, deal or go pro early or whatever it was. And he said, go pro early or go pro just in general, because you're one more year closer to your second contract in the NFL when you can get even more money. So that's an interesting angle to look at it as well. But Nix is in that weird spot. And I don't know if he really wanted to say that, like, hey, I'm out here trying to decide if I need to come back to school because the money is going to be worth it on the short term, or long term, is it best for me to go pro? And he doesn't really have a full say in that. Like, he just can't go to Division Street and say, I need $5 million. I'm just throwing out some crazy number to stay here. And then they automatically say yes. Like, there's that other side. There's another side of negotiation. So yeah, I think there may be some some negotiating here. And I also think we've said this before. We've said it today on this podcast. He wants to control the narrative, as would anybody would want to control the narrative. And I really wonder if it's shaping up where it's going to come out hours, maybe the day or two after the Holiday Bowl, and he announces what he's doing one way or the other, whether it's coming back for what would be a 5th season or it would be going pro. I don't know that answer, but that's just kind of where I think things are progressing. Because look, 2 guys who have no choice, they have to move on. Bennett Williams, Alex Forsyth, today after practice, they said, like, Bennett Williams was legitimate, saying, like, I may not return to Eugene when our bowl game is over. I may actually just end up staying in San Diego and doing my NFL training there. He goes, that's one of the locations I'm considering. And he was like, kind of dawned on me, I may not actually just fly with the team back to Eugene. I may just stay there. Forsyth said he's already got plans locked in after the bowl game to go to Scottsdale, Arizona to train with Shane Lemieux, Jake Hansen, and some other offensive linemen that have come through Oregon. So if Bo does want to go pro, like, it happens quick from a training perspective and getting yourself ready once that bowl game is over. And the quicker you go, we're talking days that are important, to get your body healthy, to get your body training for that combine and for that NFL draft. So I would imagine he wants to make this decision super fast after the bowl game is over.
I want to pose the question I saw on the message board I thought was kind of smart yesterday, and we've been discussing a little behind the scenes, and I'm thinking it might be a consensus here, but I saw people kind of asking this, and obviously this isn't exactly what the situation is. I don't know if Oregon really has a choice one way or the other. I don't think Dane Lanning is sitting with a devil on one shoulder and angel on the other. I don't know, kind of thing, picking between. But like, okay, hypothetically, if you could choose 1 year of Bo Nix or 3 to 4 years, whatever it is, of Dante Moore, if that was the actual dilemma, what would you choose? And I think it's an interesting practice in thinking through a couple of things, but for starters, of the value of someone like Nix, who's proven himself, versus the potential and the upside of somebody to have some continuity at a position that Oregon just hasn't had continuity at, right? They've had so much quarterback turnover. If Nix does ultimately go pro, that's going to be 3 straight years with basically one and gone quarterback starting with, Shuck, Brown, and now Nix. Like, I think there's a compelling case to be made for, they probably don't win as many games. I wouldn't say probably. I would be very surprised if they won as many games in 23 if Dante Moore was the quarterback as opposed to Bo Nix, because you're talking about a 22, 23-year-old, 50-year senior quarterback versus a teenager who's never played at this level. But there is something to be said of you've got the quarterback and that can maybe develop under Will Stein and give you 2 to 3 years of success, which is, of course, why everybody's really high on Dante Moore's upside. But then there's the flip side, of course, is do you rely upon a Dante Moore who I know he's recruited, his rankings are much higher than Ty Thompson, but there's nothing to say. And again, I don't want to write Ty Thompson all the way off because I've been clear on this podcast. I'm not ready to do that. But hypothetically, it doesn't work with Dante Moore. And now you've got a similar situation in 2 years or in a year or so where you're going, okay, well, that didn't work out. What do we do now? I think there's just more certainty with Nix in the short term than you have with the players unproven. So where would you guys, I'm just curious because I saw pretty good discussion back and forth on our message board, good points made both ways. Like, Jared, where do you land? Like if you were hypothetically in this dilemma of 1 year of Nix versus 3 years of Moore, where do you side?
Oh, give me 3 years or more. I don't think this is really that hard because Oregon and every program in the country now has the biggest safety net of all time in the transfer portal if things go poorly. Just, the last couple of years, you look at Tyler Shuck, who I think is still a good quarterback, and I think he'll be good. I don't know. Does he have another year of eligibility at Texas Tech? He must. I think he'll still be good at Texas Tech. And he has been pretty good in what he's shown as long as he's been healthy. But again, you go to the transfer portal, you bring in Anthony Brown, who leads you to 10 victories. You bring in Bo Nix the very next year. All of these because your big, high-profile 4-star quarterbacks haven't necessarily panned out. If Dante Moore doesn't pan out, you still have the ability to get into a transfer portal quarterback who can help situate your program. But the flip side is that if Dante Moore does pan out, that's a damn good quarterback prospect. And again, he's so young, and he's not even out of college yet. He's still seemingly wavering between Oregon and UCLA out of nowhere. That we'll find out eventually. But again, if he pans out, if he lives up to his expectations in this unbelievably stacked quarterback class of 2023, that's going to be a bigger programming altering quarterback than anybody that you can get in the transfer portal. Plus, it's 3 years. It's 3 guaranteed years as long as he doesn't transfer. And I would take that over 1 year of Nix. And obviously, the upside of Nix is that, like you just went through, Eric, is this 22, 23-year-old quarterback who has plenty of Power 5 level experience in both the SEC and the Pac-12 leads you after just leading you to a 9-3 regular season with the Holiday Bowl against UNC. Well, congrats. But he's an excellent quarterback who's a great leader and somebody who understands the game. There's, like Nix, there's no bad decisions here. I just think that I would take the guaranteed multiple years of potential of Dante Moore than I guess the surefire 1 year of Bo Nix. And me, I'm a potential guy. Like I'm a huge baseball fan, so prospects is the name of the game for me. And I love, like, this is all of baseball is like, well, do I trade these 18 to 19-year-olds for the 28-year-old, star player who might live up to the expectations and might sign with the team after the year, blah, blah, blah. So me, I'm always going to go high upside, younger potential guys than I am established figures.
I'm the opposite. And I would say Bo Nix over 1 year of Dante Moore, because I think if you factor in that if Bo Nix comes back, you've got Noah Whittington and Bucky Irving at running back. You have Troy Franklin, Chris Hudson, Jurion Dickey in at wide receiver. That's 3 really good guys there. You've got a couple younger guys too in that position. Terrence Ferguson at tight end. I think you've got a good core group of 3 linemen, JPJ, Marcus Harper, and Josh Connolly Jr. at the offensive line, where you add Bo Nix in, the pieces are there for a 10, 11 win season in 2023. Schedule's easier. You don't have to play Georgia. Likelihood that you go 3-0 in non-conference play is huge. The playoffs are on the table. And then let's just think about this for a second here, okay? Because we're talking NIL, we're talking collectives. Dante Moore is probably going to be getting a lot of money from Oregon collectives when he arrives at Oregon. If he doesn't go to Oregon, they can spread that money to Bo. They can spread that money to maybe a David Hicks and a Caden Proctor, who are also very seriously looking hard at Oregon. Now, like, this is crazy, hypothetical world here, but you could essentially, quarterbacks garnish the most money in the NIL landscape, whether it's a current QB at Oregon like Bo Nix, or whether it's a high school prospect like Dante Moore. It's just, they're the ones that get the huge gobs of crazy amounts, crazy money. You could spread that out where you lose Dante Moore, yes, but you gain Bo Nix back. Hypothetically, you could maybe use some of that to position yourself better, to land Hicks and Proctor, which solve two more problems for your team. And then the transfer portal, like Jared said, the greatest safety net in college athletics. You've got your quarterback for 2023. Go find your next high school guy. Go find your next portal guy that's got multiple years of eligibility left and the portal next year. Worry about that problem down the road. It's college athletics is moving very quickly to the NFL landscape where it's worry about this season only and you'll figure out the future later, because the mechanisms are in place for you to quickly reshuffle the roster real fast year over year.
I'd like to see people in the comments weigh in on this one, because I probably lean with Matt, actually, which might surprise some, just in terms of I'd rather have something sure, and maybe it's because I'm just in general not the biggest risk taker in life. So like I'm kind of looking at this like it's a very low risk, pretty high reward with Bo Nix for 1 year. And as Matt said, I kind of look at it and go, and then you just go back in the portal, which is the same safety net is that if it doesn't work out with Dante Moore. Now, I also agree with Jared that the upside and ceiling of what Dante Moore can be in 2 or 3 years figures most likely to be higher than whoever quarterbacks X, Y, or Z is in the portal or from the prep ranks, or a Ty Thompson, whose name we haven't mentioned, who could be developing, and maybe he ends up actually becoming something significant and lives up to all that promise. But I like the idea of having something concrete at quarterback next season to keep the program moving in a positive direction, in part because there's also as you said, Jared, the possibility doesn't work out with Dante. It's also the possibility it works out for Dante for a year and he transfers somewhere else for more money and goes, you just don't know. And so I guess maybe it's short-sighted, but that's what makes this such an interesting conversation, because I think if you spoke to 20 different Duck fans or people who are around the program or who have kind of a vested interest in some kind, I think you get a pretty wide variance of answers. James Crepia right away was like, give me Bo Nix, which surprised me. I thought he was going to have the long term. And most people took the Bo Nix route. But I also, I'm not speaking on both sides because I think I take Bo, but like there's a really compelling case for Oregon, especially with the history at this position since Justin Herbert has left, of saying it would just be really nice to have some continuity and not be. I know Bo Nix that'd be 2 years. So there's a little bit of continuity, but there's just been so much turnover and at that position. So kind of an interesting hypothetical.
What happens if Bo Nix shows up not Bo Nix, Dante Moore shows up and isn't really the guy yet, isn't ready to play, and because he's still here, Ty Thompson is also on the roster, and maybe he has to play because Dante Moore is not ready, or maybe Ty Thompson wins the job, but it's clear he's not ready, and then Dante Moore shows up and he plays, whatever. Both QBs play in 2023, and neither guy really is it. And both leave or it becomes clear that, hey, you need to find another guy because this ain't it. Like, they're not the option. And you have to go and find another quarterback again. So for now, like the 5th year in a row, you have a different quarterback. Like that, while unlikely, that's a scenario that isn't really that far-fetched from playing out.
Well, in that case, Oregon they need another quarterback to begin with. So they would, if they were all in on Dante Moore, they would need to bring in a guy who could be a suitable backup. Same idea as what Anthony Brown was with Tyler Shuck. And they would just do that again. And yeah, there is that possibility. But again, we could come up with a million different possibilities. This is just an answer here. I could reply to you guys. It's like, well, what if Bo Nix pulls a Kyler Murray and is injured on the 3rd snap of the first game of the season for the entire year? So it's an interesting exercise. I think there's a million different answers. And again, I think this is whatever you're partial to. I'm a baseball guy. So again, I'm a risk taker. It's like, do I want to trade 4 guys who are 16 to 18 years old who could turn into the next, I don't know, Manny Machado for Manny Machado right now? I don't know. But I'm going to take Dante Moore. I think the 3 years is really nice. I think his ceiling is much higher than Nix's as a 22 or 23-year-old, which is really hard to say because Nix was so damn good. But again, you look at like the physical stature, the traits, the arm talent, the speed, just the overall athleticism and the IQ that Dante Moore and his winning pedigree have shown. I mean, there's a reason that programs are going to offer him so much damn money on the open market that is college football recruiting. I think it's a really interesting question, but I feel like I'm going to be in the minority here of people who think for people who answer this question. I think there's going to be a lot of, give me Bo Nix for a year because of what we just saw. I guess I'm just a more, I don't know, optimistic, more optimistic, get it? More optimistic that people can live up to their potential. Because I think a lot of Oregon fans feel like they've been, kind of maybe screwed out of a potential quarterback from a high ranking. So whoever the next guy that comes in that's a high ranking quarterback is going to do the same as what the previous ones have done. But maybe not this time.
Sorry for leaving this. Just kind of an aside here. I had someone deliver a package here, and
what'd you get?
I don't know. It's a big package. I'm excited to open it later. We could do an unboxing here on the podcast live and see what I have. I have no idea what I have, but the guy was very cordial and apologized for interrupting the podcast. But I digress.
That's okay. Looks like I think Matt texted us. Looks like his internet just went out, which is very untimely. Yeah, so that's Eric, it might just be you and I commanding the ship now.
Oh, is he back? He's back. Matt?
He's back.
Well, Matt, let's not have dead air here. Let's talk, and hopefully Matt returns. Well, now he's gone dark, which is not a great sign. But let's just switch topics a little bit because I think we've done a good job of covering all of the Bo Nix, Dante Moore thing. Again, it's not apples to oranges. I don't think. I think it's a tough discussion. Here comes Matt again. Let's bring him back. Whoa, we changed boxes. We fixed it. We were just about to transition to some Will Stein talk because we did have some people talk about that, Matt. So if you want to go ahead and kind of lead the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, he's here. Erik was the one that spotted him walking out of practice today. He is involved in some capacity. Dan Lanning was like, hey, he's here. Why not use him? Another set of eyes. It would be kind of dumb of us not to. Now, he's also not like running the offense. He's not running the show. I'm sure it's more of him just standing from afar, kind of seeing what offensive players he has at his disposal next season. And then if something comes up in a play or a scheme or what have you, and he has some input, he'll go over to a coach probably. Maybe we want to try this instead, or what if we did this instead? Would it change much? But he's not in the game planning format. But he's here. He's involved, and Bo Nix has also acknowledged that he's had conversations. He said you have to have conversations with Will Stein because that factors into his own decision of coming back to school next season or going pro. And it's unique. It's interesting. I think a couple years ago, we covered, Jared was here too before it as well, where like offensive coordinator gone, but the new one's kind of here, or maybe it's just a different position. I can't remember.
Well, it was last year with McClendon in place of Moorhead.
Yeah. And like the new guy is here, but he's not really
I see what you're saying.
here. Yeah. The new guy's here already, but he's not really here yet because he's not all the way in because there's still a bowl game to play. I think we went through that once. I'm pretty sure we did.
Yeah, what was that? Was it when Arroyo left? It was probably something. It was probably when Arroyo left, and maybe when Moorhead arrived. I can't recall.
I can't remember what it was, but we've done it once. I know that.
So yeah, that's sort of Stein's. He's on campus. We can say that UTSA is playing in a bowl game right now. He is not at that game. I can confirm that because he was at Oregon's practice right around kickoff for whatever bowl that is. I can't recall. I just to kind of, I'll have a story up on duckterritory.com later today, but I think Lanning was just kind of gushed a little bit about what he sees in Will Stein. A lot of similar characteristics and traits that Kenny Dillingham, had, that he also sees in Will Stein, and somebody who he doesn't, by the way, have really much of any history with. And I think that was one of the things that, when you were looking at possible replacement for Dillingham, I know that was one of the things, Matt kind of had jotted down as a priority was, okay, who has Lanning worked with? Who has Malco worked with? Who have some of these other people who are prominent in this decision-making? Who are their kind of career contacts? And there isn't a ton of overlap with Stein and the staff. I think he was on Texas's staff a little bit when Maringer was there, but he was in a lesser role. Maringer, I think, was coaching tight ends, and I think maybe he was a GA or a quality control coach or something at that point. So there's a little overlap there, but for the most part, this is somebody who is new to Dan Lanning and company, and Dan made it clear of like, we're going to hire the best people. It doesn't have to be somebody that I have, kind of like an intimate history of relationships with, which he doesn't with Will. It's somebody who is again relatively new here, and it'll be interesting to see kind of what the recruiting process, how this plays out. If we think, how much of what's going on with Dante Moore is related to Will Stein, how much of it is just the Dillingham relationship, kind of how does that play out? Does that become a factor? And I think the other thing from practice that was interesting was kind of getting a feel for how this offense is going to operate in a bowl game, in terms of who's running the show, which is, it's funny because I think twice now we've talked to Dan Lanning and he has said it's going to be a split between Maringer and Junior Adams. But then Bo Nix was asked about it and kind of indicated it sounds like Drew Maringer is the point person right now, or at least that was the way it was kind of framed. I don't know, Jared, you might have that quote available more readily than I do of what he said about Maringer, because the way it was kind of discussed from Lanning's perspective, it sounded like, yeah, it's going to be kind of a joint operation. And then the way Nix kind of discussed it, it did sound like Maringer is kind of running. What can you read the quote there, Jared?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, this is just like Eric said, it's just Nix talking about the offense. He says the playbook is the same, but Coach Maringer has done a really good job. He's called plays in the past. He's a very smart football mind, so he's going to put us in good situations. And then he mentioned that Coach Adams, Junior Adams, is still working with the wide receivers. He's got the wide receivers going. So I think that's kind of not necessarily what we learned from Dan in the first press conference that we had, because, again, he said that it was going to be this huge conglomerate, this big effort from the offensive staff, but Maringer and then Junior Adams are going to be the top two guys in the play calling. But, yeah, it looks like it's going to be Drew Maringer for the game. And I think that's the right call. I mean, I don't really think that there's a bad decision here, just because it's a bowl game. It's a one-time thing. Maringer was a sole offensive coordinator at Rutgers in 2016. I think he was the youngest in the Power 5 level during that season. But it was good to see Will Stein, I didn't see him, but it was good to hear that Will Stein was still there at practice today. Eric, I got a question for you, though. Is Will Stein tall?
Not a tall man. Not tall.
No.
About a Kenny Dillingham person in height.
I think
that's what they hate on small people. I'm speaking up for the short kids.
Yeah, Jared, what are you trying to do
I
here?
mean,
Come on, we've got a short person
I'm the
among us.
heightest. Yeah, no, I'm just wondering because that's 2 in a row now from Dan. So if Will Stein leaves, I think we have to put in the height for each offensive potential coordinator that they're going after.
There are some physical similarities. They're both 33 years old, which is, again, this is 2 consecutive offensive coordinators I've been older than, which is really aging me. And they're both about the same height, about 5'10", 5'9", I would say, and they both have kind of blondish hair. So I mean, they're not doppelgangers, but there's some physical similarities. Yeah, no, I for some reason had thought Will Stein was going to be like a 6'3", 6'4" person because he was a college quarterback at Louisville, but I was surprised to learn he was listed at 5'10" in college, and seeing him walk around. Gosh, it sounds like we're being so mean about somebody's. You're right, Matt. This is bad. A couple of tall people.
Oh, we're not being mean. I'm just asking the question because when we all saw Kenny Dillingham for the first time, we were like, he's not as tall as we envisioned him being. He kind of looks like a GA out there, but
as a fellow short person, I'm offended.
Yeah, I think you should be, Matt. The tenor of this whole conversation is so off by Jared. He's really. I'm just kidding, because I was the one slacking you. Like, Will Stein's really short.
It happens, man. I just have to ask. Since I wasn't there, I need to know the ins and outs of what Stein looks like.
Shoe size next for you.
Yeah, do you have?
That'd be great.
Yeah, Matt.
9.5.
9.5. Oh boy.
We'll see. Yeah.
All right. Let's take a quick break. And because there's nowhere to go from this segment.
At some point,
and when we come back, we'll dive into the recruiting aspect that comes with this weekend as well. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Recruiting is still going on. Transfer season is still going on. Signing day is today's Friday, so 6 days away. 5 days, depending on when you listen to this podcast, and the entire landscape for Oregon's 2023 recruiting class is currently in flux right now. I think it's a weird time. It's something that you felt really good about for 90% of this cycle, and then now in the last couple of days, the number 3 player in the country, the highest rated quarterback ever committed to the Oregon Ducks, Dante Moore. He looks like he could be flipping to not only a different school, which, if you had told Duck fans, hey, he's going to flip, I think everyone would be like, oh, is he going to Ohio State closer to home? Is he maybe going to stay home and play for Michigan or Michigan State? And none of Duck fans would be really surprised if that was a scenario that would play out if you told them in September. But UCLA, of all schools, a fellow West Coast school, a future Big Ten participant, is the school that's got a lot of the momentum right now. He was on campus last week for an official visit. At the time, you're kind of like, not the greatest, but Oregon's still fine. And in a week, it's transpired to can Oregon get back to being the number 1 team right now. That's kind of where things seem to be trending. And it opens kind of the discussion back to Bo Nix and back to just the position in general. We talked about this on the last show. What does Oregon do if he leaves? And it puts a lot of pressure on Oregon. And maybe this is why Bo Nix is waiting. Because we talked about leverage. We talked about, Dante Moore using UCLA to get more NIL leverage. Maybe it's Bo Nix waiting on what happens with Dante Moore, because if Moore flips to UCLA, all of a sudden Bo Nix has a lot of leverage to dangle over NIL collectives at Oregon. You want me to come back? Well, my price tag just went up, because if I don't come back, Moore's gone. Y'all are screwed.
And the question is, how screwed would they be if they end up without either of them, right? Hudson Card, who we've talked about on this podcast, has a prior relationship with Will Stein, former Texas quarterback. Matt, you said he's been in Eugene.
Yep, he was here Wednesday and Thursday.
So he is certainly a target to know. I'd be curious to see how aggressive they are if that's the direction they go. What about DJU, who we know, by the way, also just visited UCLA, which is kind of interesting. And with Moore, the information that has come out has been kind of interesting. So we had a report from Steve Wiltfong early in the week suggesting, yeah, he visited UCLA, but Oregon's still in pretty good standing. I know those listening to the podcast are going like, wait, on Wednesday we asked you guys, and you guys were like unanimous, like, no, I think Moore ends up at Oregon. But this is how quickly things can change. And the thing that Steve said in his most recent update, which indicated UCLA might be in a good position, is that Moore was really intrigued by the idea of being a starting quarterback year one at UCLA. That's part of the pitch. And then a Bruin Report Online, the UCLA 24/7 affiliate, had a post or report earlier on Friday suggesting there might be some NIL collectives in play here. So there's some money being kind of bandied about, and you just kind of wonder how much of this could be leveraged for more with Oregon, how much of this is just like UCLA just came in and made a offer you can't refuse kind of bid, and just put and because it is, we've said it, as Matt said, it would be logical to say, okay, he's a Midwest kid. We talked about in the last podcast with David Hicks about how he's sticking probably in Texas or closer to home. At some point, a kid coming from Michigan, it's understandable that maybe they decide to stay closer to home somewhere in Big Ten country, or even, I don't know, maybe they go a little bit south but go Big 12 country. Eugene's, that's a distance away. But the fact that he's looking at UCLA, and the fact that now we're hearing money being a bigger impact, just kind of interesting to kind of read the tea leaves on what's actually happening in this recruitment, because it had felt like, if all things were equal and the money wasn't a factor, that Oregon had a pretty compelling case here. But if it all comes down to the financial part, and again, we have no idea what each school is offering, which makes this so difficult. That's why covering college sports right now is so challenging compared to covering pro sports, when you can say, well, the Philadelphia 76ers offered this free agent $12 million, but hypothetically the Nets were able to offer 18 and more years and X, Y, and Z, whatever. We don't have that information, but I do think it's interesting that, according to Tracy Pearson, like I said earlier from Bro, that there, it sounds like the NIL part is a component here that I hadn't previously seen really been discussed.
It's not overly surprising that the NIL piece is a huge deal in this, as it should be, as I'm sure it probably was in Oregon landing Dante Moore to begin with.
Sure.
We just won't know, and I wonder if one day that those reports or those deals will get kind of reported as they do in in the NBA and the NFL and the MLB, where someone is breaking the news about someone has signed with X school for X amount of years and X amount of dollars. I think that's the next wave of what college football journalism is going to be. But that's just me. I will say, again, like, the reports that he's interested in becoming UCLA's starter. Yeah, every kid is interested in becoming a starting player on a football team. That's why they go to those schools to begin with. I think I think that was just the initial report to say as to why he was interested in UCLA, to kind of get off the case of it being really he's interested because they're going to give him more money than another school would. Because if we look at our conversation that we just had in this podcast about the Dante Moore versus Bo Nix for 3 years or 1 year, Matt brought up the point of, like, what if Dante Moore just isn't a starting level quarterback at his very first season? And that's the case if UCLA wants him too. If UCLA wants Dante Moore, what if he's not a starting level caliber quarterback when he first comes in? And yes, of course, he wants to start. But like I said, everybody wants to go in there and start. Every recruit does. Every recruit thinks that they can until they get to that level. So again, that's my conspiracy me is saying that, well, that's just a report because it's really an NIL deal more than anything else. But I think what really makes this an interesting deal above the NIL stuff is, as we mentioned on Wednesday's podcast, is UCLA's transition to the Big Ten. I don't think it's any coincidence that all of this is becoming very immediate news following UCLA's acceptance into the Big Ten from the Board of Regents of the University of California. I think those things go hand in hand, and now that UCLA knows that in a year and a half they'll be in the Big Ten, and now Dante Moore, who's a Midwestern guy, or whatever division of America we want to call that, Midwestern, And now in the Big Ten is going to play in front of families at Michigan or Michigan State, or they'll make the drive to Indiana or something like that. Again, I don't know where this one is going to go. Clearly, it's leaning in favor of UCLA at the present moment in time from Tracy Pearson's report and what Steve Wiltfong has said. But recruiting is recruiting. In a week, it could be completely different. In 48 hours, it could be completely different. So it's just something to consider, just how different it could be in the next 48 or week or whatever the case may be. I just think it's very interesting developments for Oregon. And then if that domino eventually falls, you kind of have to look at where does this class go if that dominoes fall right before signing day? Like what happens? Because it might just be a similar December for us as it was last season after Mario Cristobal left.
Yeah, what happens next for Oregon if Dante Moore does leave? Because look, they need another quarterback, even if Bo Nix comes back, because they have Bo. Ty is still on the roster, which Erik mentioned that earlier. Doesn't want to forget that. But you can't go into 2023 without 3 scholarship quarterbacks. So then the transition goes, okay, well, Bo's back. Ty's locked in. Do you go after a DJU? And does that open, maybe that opens the door for Mateo in the package, the 2 brothers playing together. But does DJ want to sit a year? You don't know that answer. Would
probably
adding
doesn't.
probably doesn't.
He doesn't. I know that answer.
Was adding DJ, like, would that kind of push off Ty? Hey, you just added a guy who's kind of similar in age as me. I'm gone. I've given you a chance. I'm okay being a backup for another season developing, but I don't want to compete against a guy that's the same age as me. Like, I'm gone. Hudson Card, how does that factor in? Or do you maybe go to the prep ranks and you offer a different quarterback at the high school level? Oregon is in a very difficult position here because this is all happening. It's all uncertain one way or the other for multiple players that could greatly impact the recruiting class, could greatly impact the short term and the long term of this program. Like, there's a 4-star quarterback in the state of Oregon, Sam Levitt. I don't think he's like a must get for Oregon, but if this happened like right after the Oregon State game, you could have theorized, hey, his team just made it to the championship game at the highest qualification of football in the state of Oregon and won. He's the best player in the state of Oregon. He was previously committed to Washington State. The Huskies tried to jump in when they lost their commitment. Michigan State jumped in when they realized Dante Moore wasn't going there. He's now since committed to Michigan State, but had this happened a couple weeks earlier, maybe Oregon gets involved there with a local quarterback who they feel like they could get. Another name that they, probably realistically could be an option if they choose to do it is Gabari Johnson. He's from Tacoma, 4-star, committed to Missouri. Oregon offered him a scholarship under Kenny Dillingham. The Missouri offensive coordinator just left to become the offensive coordinator at Boise State. So there's kind of a crack there that you could maybe widen a little bit if you're Oregon. Hey, come play closer to home. You lost your OC that you committed to at Missouri. Come be a guy. But I don't know what they do. They're gonna have to find somebody, and I don't know who it would be right now. And unfortunately, you're in a position where there's not a lot of time, there's not a lot of options, and you have to make a decision of going portal. And if you go portal, do you go like grad transfer 1 or 2 year guy, or do you try and find a project player, or is there a guy that's a high school prospect that's worth developing over time in a couple of years? I don't know what the answer is on that one.
I don't either, and that's why it is a precarious spot. And I just think you're going to have a hard time finding solutions in the prep ranks at this point because, in general, as we've established earlier, like even Dante Moore is no sure thing to be incredible year one. I don't know if you're going to find a prep guy who's currently uncommitted and open to flipping, who's on that same, even on Dante Moore's caliber. You'd be looking at someone like Sam Levitt is I think we at 24/7, I think have him as a high 3-star, but his composite's a low 4-star. Like he's like a 340th best player in the country or something on the composite. Barely a 4-star. Like that's a pretty large gap. And so you wouldn't bring him in expecting him to start. You bring him in thinking he could be a developmental prospect who could be good in a couple of years.
Millen.
Yeah, he'd be like that kind of, and hopefully he's, I mean, not to be mean, but hopefully he's better than that long term. So no, I just think you are in a challenging spot. I do think regardless, because I'm sure there's Oregon fans listening to this going like, gosh, so we're not going to have Dante, we're not going to have Bo. No one's saying that. I think there's still a decent chance Bo comes back. Bo could easily have already made an NFL decision and announced it if he was, not wavering and knew exactly what he wanted to do. I think there's a possibility that happens. I think the Dante Moore thing is probably more precarious. I feel significantly less confident that he's going to end up at Oregon today than I did 48 hours ago when we were on this podcast saying we thought he'd come back or we thought he'd come to Oregon. But there are solutions in the portal. Card makes a lot of sense given his history with Stein. I know that's not the most sexy, exciting player. The Uyunglele combination package deal, if you could get DJ and Mateo, is certainly a very intriguing option as well. DJ is somebody who I still think has a ton of talent, and I'm not going to be the person who says you can't take a reclamation project and have it work, because we just saw Oregon have a reclamation project with Bo Nix. Guess what? It turned out okay. Turned out more than okay. So, I mean, I don't think Oregon's going to get in the spot where they're left with a really unqualified player starting. And who knows, like, there's even a scenario where Ty Thompson ends up being your starting quarterback in 2023. And guess what? He's pretty good. Like, I'm not discounting that possibility at all, even though I've seen basically the consensus is he stinks based off of like 24 snaps and mop up duty where he's not been given the full reins of the offense. But I digress. I understand that's the way kind of the analysis works these days when you do have such small sample sizes. But I think Oregon's going to end up being okay at quarterback. Like, I'm not expecting it's going to be a complete disaster. But I do think that it has felt like for a really long time that it was going to be one of two doors that were open, right? It was either going to Bo Nix returns or it was Dante Moore. Now it feels like door 3 might be, more and more possible that there's going to be an alternative to one of those two guys being the guy. I still lean Bo probably makes it back, but I obviously don't have a for sure there.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that door 3 is filled with quality quarterbacks, and there's plenty of dudes in the transfer portal. I'll just keep it short. I think regardless of what happens, I think Oregon will have a very talented quarterback heading into next season. That is probably going to be a clear bona fide number one. It might be Bo, it might be Dante, it might be Ty, or it might be a transfer portal guy, but I do think that they're going to have some talented quarterback leading them into the 2023 season, and they're going to have Will Stein, who was talked about a lot today as another big offensive mind, someone who can replicate a type of season that Kenny Dillingham just had at the helm. Like Matt said, they're going to have earlier in the podcast, they're going to have weapons on the outside. They're going to have running backs. They're going to have an offensive line. Despite this feeling like, the sky is falling, I still think that they'll be in good shape regardless. And it might, congrats to Oregon fans for DJ Uyunglele becoming the starting quarterback. So it'll be somebody. I promise it'll be somebody talented.
Well, we'll end the podcast with this because there's so much to get to. We could spend the whole podcast on this segment real quick here. But Oregon does have a 5-star on campus right now, Jurion Dickey, which is big news because there was those rumors, which I didn't really believe in, that he was going to consider signing in February and not in a couple days. He's on campus. Jeremiah Byers, UTEP transfer, four-star portal player. He's on campus for an official visit the tail end of this weekend. Before that, he sees Ohio State for an official visit. 4-star Notre Dame commit, running back Jaden Lamar is also his younger brother, who's a high-profile recruit, I believe, in the 2025 class. He's currently on campus as well. 4-star Ashton Porter, who's trending towards Oregon, a defensive lineman from the state of Texas. He's on campus. Jamari Johnson, a 3-star athlete, tight end, very similar player to Kenyon Sadiq from an athletic standpoint. He's on campus as well. Louisville commit. So Oregon could be flipping a couple guys. They could be landing a potential Texas defensive lineman. So there are good things happening. It's not a doom and gloom weekend entirely for Oregon. Yes, your 5-star quarterback may be flipping to UCLA, but they do have high-profile players on campus. We expect more names to show up as we see them. And, hey, look, there's always that possibility, right? That rumor that has yet to be confirmed one way or the other of Dante Moore coming back to Oregon to give Lanning and Will Stein that last pitch before he ultimately decides what he's doing. That still may happen. We don't know if it's going to happen. We don't know if Dante Moore makes it to Eugene, but I think if he does make it, that's a really big positive for Oregon and the chances of keeping him.
Setting up to be a really eventful signing day, which hasn't always been the case of late. Usually the February signing day gets a little more interesting. It might be a pretty interesting December 21st for Oregon. I think there are going to be a lot of things to watch. There's several other players that we haven't even talked about who are targets. We've talked about in previous shows, some 5-star talent that are looking at Oregon. Probably don't feel great about any of them, but it's possible 1, 2 of those guys maybe end up at Oregon. If you want to put on your positivity hat, I don't know if that's a term. If you want to be glass half full, it's probably more apt. But no, it's going to be, this is not my positivity hat. I'll take it off. I'll put it on a different hat later. But no, I think it's going to be a really fun couple of days, and we'll see how positive it is for Oregon.
Yeah, Wednesday could be crazy. I hadn't thought of that.
Could be a fun one.
It's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast Friday edition. We'll be back, whether there's breaking news over the weekend or we'll be back on Monday with some kind of a show. I don't know if we're going to do the mailbag or if we're going to talk more recruiting preview of National Signing Day, but then we've got National Signing Day on Wednesday, which we'll be doing something as well. So keep your eyes out for podcasts. They could come this weekend. They could come on Monday. We don't know. We'll see. Until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.